Hi there, welcome to the channel, welcome back if you're a return viewer. You're watching the Crash Review of Books, and I'm Kerry. Today, a non-fiction book from a very well-known author. That author is George Orwell. Now, if I mention that name, people immediately think 1984, maybe Animal Farm if you were set that text at school, and of course the very overused term Orwellian, which has come to mean a sort of dystopic surveillance state hellscape, word that's often very much overused, and I'm not sure that George Orwell himself would want to be known for that particular thought, as he was a much wider, broader ranged author than just 1984. My personal experience, 1984 was an extraordinary book. It's probably one of the few books that I remember leaving me with having a palpable sense of fear and dread during these several sections in that book. It's very powerful that way, and people seem to use it to condemn things depending on their political point of view. And of course, in reality, George Orwell, real name Eric Blair, was making a point about the extremes of both sides of the political spectrum could lead to a totalitarian state, like as depicted in the book. But people these days seem to either lean one way or the other and cite it as some type of proof of something, even when it was a piece of fiction which was warning against such things. And George Orwell himself was pretty much a socialist, a democratic socialist, as we might say today. He was brought up in upper classes, went to a private school, Eton, I believe, and then his experiences post-school led him to a course of what we might call today social justice causes, and he wrote plenty of essays and non-fiction works pushing his cause, and beyond the famous novels he wrote many non-fiction works as well, like I just said, and one of them, probably the first one that he had major success with was this one, Down and Out in Paris and London. Now, this is the book which he created the pen name George Orwell for. One of his publishers thought that he might not want his real name associated with the contents of this book, so that gives you an idea of what's inside this book. And it's an investigation into, running nose as usual, as is tradition in these videos. It's an investigation into how the other half lives, when that other half is the poorer parts of society. And it was written around about 100 years ago, and he shopped it around for many years and used parts of it as like for submitted as magazine articles without much success. And finally in 1933 it was published in a form. This edition I have here is the Penguin Modern Classics forms, which is widely available. This is the Kindle version. This version actually restores some stuff that was cut out of the original publication. There was a lot of swearing, both in English and French, which didn't make the original version, and this one restores it. It is quite a shock to come across very modern type swearing in a book which is 90 something years old. So that may surprise some younger viewers or people that weren't expecting this type of thing. Now anyway, Orwell had this one published and created the name Orwell. As I said, his real name's Eric Blair, and this kind of launched his career as a reporter, or doing reportage, as they say, and it led to his more famous books. The one that followed this was The Road to Wigan Pier, where an editor asked him to replicate what was going on during the Depression in America, where reporters were reporting on how the poor people were trying to strive to survive. And after that, of course, his famous book Homage to Catalonia, where he went to investigate what was going on in the Spanish Civil War, which was pretty much a dry run miniature version of what was around the corner with the horrors of World War II. So he got in on the ground floor, as it were, on the horrors that were coming for World War II. So anyway, I won't go any further with the explanation of George Orwell. I'm sure you'll have means of discovering who he was and what he wrote. You mean you're watching this on the internet anyway, so I am exploring his non-fiction works after dilly-dallying around not reading them for a long time. I have access to most of them, and so far it's an enjoyable ride. I'm not sure the enjoyable is the correct term for this book. So like the title really explains, down and out in Paris and London, it is basically a slice of life if you have no money in those two cities about 100 years ago. There are two main sections, or maybe three perhaps. The first part, he is living in a slummy hotel which doesn't cost a lot in Paris, and it describes the daily life with that and the various characters from various nationalities. They all seem to be drawn to Paris because it offered all the big city things but didn't cost a lot to live there, but at a cost of other ways of in your life. And he and his friends, he makes friends with a guy who claims to be a Russian army veteran of World War One, and together they basically walk the streets of Paris, trying to find gainful employment and survive. And their money runs out, and one thing that people seem to do to raise money in those times is sell their clothes to these big organised pawn shops, where you basically go there with a bundle of clothes and you're at the mercy of the person who organises these shops on how they'll accept things. Some of them want them boxed up, some of them want them in bags, and you deposit your clothing, and then you're given a ticket, and then later someone will read out, ticket number 50, we'll give you £1 for your pair of pants, that type of thing. And he goes through this several times in the book as his money runs out, and I think near the end he's only got like one suit left. That is in the Paris section, I mean. The section goes on for a little bit longer, and then he and his friend, I think they get into luck. His friend finds a hotel that's about to open, which requires staff, so they sign up for a job there. Of course, it kind of sort of falls through. The hotel is nowhere near actually opening. It looks like a bit of a scam. In the meantime, George Orwell, as we might call him, and his friend find employment in another hotel, a fairly expensive hotel, and they gain employment as what's called a plongeur. Literally means diver, according to my French-speaking friend, but apparently it's a separate term for the basically almost lowest of the low workers in a hotel situation. They do the dishwashing, they prepare basic food items, and basically serve the upper layers of the hotel staff are basically their bosses, and as it may be, they basically the dogs' bodies of the hotel. And there's a long section where we follow Orwell's work in this situation, and he actually finds it quite easy work, but the hours are long and the demands are strong, and the people involved are a bit crazy. So that section goes on for a while, and then he gets news from back in England that someone's found him a job looking after a disabled person, or I think he calls it in the text feeble-minded person, which probably not a term we'd use these days. So he's overjoyed about this, and he sells most of his stuff to get some decent clothes to go back to England. Goes back to England, and the job has got fallen through because the feeble-minded person and their minders has travelled overseas or something for the main time being. So he has to wait around for this job to start. And while that happens, he's basically out of money again, and he basically falls in with what you'd call tramps. You may call them vagrants where you are, or homeless people, I suppose, is the current term, although that's kind of a broader group. So the latter section of the book is basically his experiences living the tramping life. Tramping is a loaded term for New Zealand because that means hiking in New Zealand, but this is tramping as in being a tramp in England, moving from town to town, trying to basically survive, and get a lot of detail on the life, the personalities, the people that are against them in each town, the authorities, and goes into quite some detail about the what they called spikes in those days, which are kind of like doss houses, you might call them, where almost basically like stables where homeless people could, under certain conditions, find a bed for a night and maybe a simple meal, and maybe get washed perhaps. And there was like organised networks of these places in the UK, and Orwell and his fellow tramps basically travel from town to town, going to these doss houses and trying to basically survive, like I said. And it goes into quite some excruciating detail. And the overall impression I got of this book, really, it's been a couple of weeks since I finished reading it, and a lot of the finer details have started to depart my mind. But the grime, the grit, the grub, the greasiness, the oiliness, that type of thing, Orwell is excellent author, excellent descriptions of that type of thing. And that's the thing that kind of stays in your head. Where he stays, there's bug infestations, the bed sheets have been maybe washed for excuse me, months, so the sheets are yellow and oily. The clothes are grimy and grotty, and the people around them are grimy and grotty, and very often have multiple illnesses which they're trying to cope with while being a tramp. There are very few women who survive this type of thing, and he meets a couple of them, mainly men. And they'll have their stories how some type of historical wrong put them into this life of being penniless. Unlike some other books which may follow this type of thing, he does offer solutions towards the end from his socialist point of view. He basically points out that a lot of the laws that existed at that time against vagrant people or tramps was actually the cause of much of the travails they went through, and actually made the problem worse. There was some of these doss houses and places which claimed to look after the tramps actually had strict rules that you could not enter them if you had any money, any tiny amounts of money, and there's scenes of people burying their money outside so they could recover it after they come out. Other laws said that you couldn't basically retrieve charity in the same place more than one day at a time, and this kind of led to the great tramping thing where people would move from town to town, from day to day, walk massive stretches of the UK just because they couldn't stay in the same town, in the same doss house or spike as they're called. So they were constantly on the move trying to find charity and somewhere to sleep. So he, at the end of the book, he says that various conditions could be improved, and he gives examples that some of these conditions, since he was involved in this experience and had written the book, some of them had improved, and he gives examples of certain, I guess you could call them chains. Some of these doss houses that we were all organised by the same company or people, and they had chains of doss houses, and one company would improve the conditions and so on, and he approves of that. Another thing he's quite down on is the religious people like the Salvation Army, whatever, they host tramps and vagrants in their facilities, and they give like a meal or a cup of tea in exchange for you attending a service, and they're often treat these people worse than the commercial type doss houses. The religious people are very high and mighty and expect blind obedience in return for their charity. So that's basically it. The 2 or 3 sections. It's very evocative. I mean, I was quite moved by some of it. Just the descriptions of the penniless thing, it made put my own situation, where I'm always worried about money, put my own situation in perspective perhaps, and just the mere fact that this was going on 100 years ago, and you think about the things that have changed and the things that have not changed, the attitudes are much the same towards these people. Just society has changed a little bit. Some of the language and attitudes are archaic. Things about attitudes like homosexuality and that type of thing, as you might expect from a book written 90 odd years ago. Of course, like I said, Orwell was a bit of a socialist. If that offends you, maybe you don't read this book. He does care about the people he talks about, even because of his higher class background. Anyway, so that is pretty much it. George Orwell's Down and Out in Paris and London, slices of the seedier side of life from 100 odd years ago. It started a journey for me of reading more of Orwell's non-fiction, which is probably a good thing. It's always good to get a perspective from across the years, and it's a good bit of reportage. Up to you how much you think still applies today, I guess. So that is the book for today. It is the 19th of January 2025. Where is this month gone? We seem to have only just had Christmas. Meanwhile, I'm reading two other books. This one, Guitar Man by Will Hodgkinson, almost past halfway through that, so I'll probably finish that one soon. The other book I'm reading is a book called Bullshit Jobs, which is pretty much self-explanatory. An investigation in how many modern jobs basically have very little point or impact on the world and could disappear without much harm. Goes into a lot more detail on that and a lot more theories on that, but that's basically it. I will leave you to it then. Have a good day, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.